Hi there, everybody. This is Stephen Brandt. I am sending this out to you on March the 21st. I just finished doing this webinar for a number of people that were registered and realized after the fact that I had opened up some polls, some questions, and neglected to close the poll. And so therefore there were some slides that people that participated in the webinar did not get to see. So I am redoing this in order to make a recording to get it out so that you can see all of the slides that were missed. So thank you everyone for your understanding, for your patience. And I will just kind of go through the same thing in a little bit of a different format, but share with you then the poll results. So what we were talking about was building accountability, the Oz Principle Self-Track Overview. I did mention that my company is DOOR Training and Consulting in Canada. We're part of a global training and consulting organization that provides training to a number of global leading enterprises like Microsoft and IBM, Abbott Laboratories, Harley-Davidson, Unilever, Hyundai, Sony, a whole number of others. And we operate in about 50 different countries. So we have over a 35-year history, over 1,000 facilitators around the world in about 50 countries. And because of our reach, then we've also acquired exclusive licenses to what we consider to be premium third-party intellectual property. So all the work we're doing around accountability is been developed by a company called Partners in Leadership. They're the accountability training and culture change company. And this slide here is to show that this content didn't just come out of the blue. It's been very well, highly regarded, very well recognized. Chief Learning Officer magazine is kind of an entity that very much is for learning and development and leadership and how organizations use content to transform and drive results. They do some regular assessments, run regular awards. You can see here that Partners in Leadership in 2014 won a gold award. This was for excellence in content for driving results. In 2015, Partners in Leadership won a gold award for social learning. So this was especially with our culture process and our digital tools to help ensure that we can make it social and viral in order to retain and sustain the learning. What you don't see here is another award again from Chief Learning Officer magazine from 2016, which was a silver award once again for excellence in content. And you'll see there's an award from International E-Learning Association, who basically determined that this was the winner of a blended learning solution. So it was the best blended learning solution that they evaluated in the world. Here's a partial client list. You can see these are very notable, reputable organizations that have done phenomenal things that we rely upon for a lot of devices, things that we use every day to communicate and to engage with people, or to consume, or to save our life. So these are all well-respected organizations. This content that Partners in Leadership has developed is around 3 tracks. So the Oz Principle, which is what we're focusing on today for the self-track, it's about taking personal accountability. So that book came out in 1994. At that time, you would have had to go to barnesandnoble.com because you couldn't go to Barnes & Noble store, an old bricks and mortar store, because you could not go to Amazon.com. There was really no .com back in 1994. And so at that time, if you looked up organizational accountability, the Oz Principle was the only book. So it was the first and the seminal book on accountability, and it has been a top 5 leadership and management bestseller every single year since. So it's really become the definitive work and the original work, creating kind of the models and the vernacular vocabulary that people most associate around accountability in that entire time. Partners in Leadership, just has been doing this work for close to 30 years. So despite the age of the books only sort of came out to highlight some of the work that they've been doing. Change the Culture, Change the Game is the book that sort of outlines the building an accountable culture track. And there's a book called How Did That Happen, which is really the premise for the Holding Others Accountable track. So just by the numbers, Partners in Leadership has thousands of clients in over 106 countries. I think the key point of that is knowing that obviously there's a great diversity in cultures and different languages in different countries around the world, and accountability resonates one way or another with pretty well everybody around the world. And there's millions of people trained. So this is not something we just developed. It's been very much proven. So we talk about how accountability begins by clearly defining the results. So this is really being really clear on what constitutes winning. How do we know that we are indeed winning at the end of a day, at the end of a week, at the end of a year? How do we know that we've won? So in sports, there's a scoreboard. Everybody knows how to keep track of the score, how goals are defined, and at the end of the day, what's most important is winning, right? So counting the scores within a certain period of time, that's what's really most important. There's a lot of things that we can do and should do really, really well that all sort of contribute to that. But at the end of the day, winning is kind of the most important thing. So we get people to think, what's really clearly the results we're trying to get people to achieve? And they're key results. They're just one of a few key organizational results prioritized as most important. So there are some results that are clearly more important than the others. So if we run in the red, for example, we can only operate on credit for so long as certain people are willing to finance us and capitalize us and help us move forward. Otherwise, we have to be profitable, right? Anybody who's an entrepreneur knows that cash flow kind of requires that you've got to be generating profit. There's only so much credit that you can get. So that's obviously a key metric. But there could be other things, obviously, right? So safety is obviously one of those ones that's very high on people's list as a top key result. And there are others. And what's really key about this is, as opposed to many organizations we go into, they have metrics around what results. They might have KPIs or a balanced scorecard. And so if we ask people, if you've got a balanced scorecard or a list of KPIs with 12 items and you achieve 9 of them, how have you done? Most people would say, well, I've done fairly okay. But then the question is, well, which 3 have you missed? And how much more important or less important are they than the other 9? And so who gets to decide then which one gets, which we're accountable to hit and miss? And if we hit 9 and we've done well, what if we've done 8? Is that really that much horrifically worse than hitting 9? So who gets to decide which ones are really key and who's accountable for what? And so accountability really becomes clearly tied to what's the key result. So we ask people, are key results clearly defined and understood throughout your organization? 85% say no, they're not. We demonstrated this in a session actually just yesterday. We were in a room with a CEO, 10 of his direct reports, and we asked, put everybody on the spot. We asked all the 10 reports to say, okay, take a pen and paper, write down what you think if we were to ask the CEO right now, what are his top 3 key results? Write them down. And then we asked everybody what they were. And so there was some similarity in the room, but nobody knew for certain that they really had it right. And, that was part of our premise, is that, over 80% of the organizations, are in exactly that same boat, right? That even amongst the leadership team, that they don't know clearly what constitutes winning. There's a lot of important things we do, but what really is winning that we need to create real accountability for, to do and say and act in the right way to make sure we achieve those results first and foremost. And we ask people another one, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is, do priorities change frequently, creating confusion around the key results you need to achieve? So this is when crises come up and fires have to be put out and whatnot. So 87% say yes. It means the circumstances and the crisis of the day put a tremendously greater priority on what we thought we were setting out to do for the year, and so we lose sight of what's really most important. Then we talk about activity versus results. So activity are the actions that people take that lead to results. That people are taking activity and involved in activity all day long, right? They show up, theoretically, they're on the payroll, they're on the clock, they're active, they're doing stuff. So do all actions lead to results, we ask people. And when I ask this in a room, most people will immediately answer no. But then as I pause and I don't say anything, then they'll say, well, yes, actually it does, maybe just not the result we want. And that's really the fundamental thing, is that we have activity and then we have results. The results are the desired and undesired outcomes of taking actions. So we're creating a mindset shift much more focused on results than merely activity. That becomes really key. And when you go into organizations, many of you work for large organizations, you're very familiar with having job description. So you very much know what your job is. It's listed out. It's given to you when you start. Everybody has one. The entire organization, the human resources part of the organization, is focused on making sure you know what your job is. You have the tools you need for your job. You have the training you need for your job. But all the focus is on the job, as opposed to, ultimately, any given individual is brought into an organization to help the organization achieve a specific result. Every team that's within the organization is there to help contribute to some key results of the organization. And And we've lost all too often that connection. So what we wanted to create is a shift to say that doing the job is achieving the results. And when we create that clarity, we have a number of beautiful examples of how we do this. Then we can actually train people in a different way and equip them with a different mindset of how what they are doing contributes to what we're overall trying to achieve. When we've created clarity on that, then we create much more uniformity of what everybody's trying to do to get to the same result. So the limitations of just doing the job, we have these people doing these jobs and things fall through the cracks because we didn't anticipate there would be this need and that demand and the other scenario and the other problem. And so inevitably, as we grow and get bigger, and assuming that the environment permits us to be profitable, then we grow and we hire more people to fill in those gaps and to prevent those things from falling through the cracks. But we get a bigger, broader organization. We have more people doing more things, but inevitably, things still come up that fall through the cracks that we just didn't anticipate or account for or think of, or things that still all need to ultimately get done in order for us to grow. And if you've watched some organizations grow, you see all of a sudden there's activities and things that exist in a big organization that just don't exist in smaller organizations. And these all become things that, for us to be who we are and do what we do, we feel they need to get done. And so somebody has to do them. So we create all of these different roles, but things still fall through the cracks. And so one of the mindset shifts, again, we want to create is to say that there's a power of joint accountability, that when we get people accountable for a bigger result together, then we've created this accountability, self and mutual accountability for a bigger result, and then we achieve certain results that we're not presently achieving. I throw this up as an exercise to show what I would often do in a room. So I tell people, let's get into teams. We're going to play a game. The game is to win, and you win by getting the most points. So here's how the game goes, and I would give these following instructions. You start with, and I'd make sure everybody's got a blank page. They're in pairs. They line up as teams. You start with 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines on your page. How you get a point is you're going to be using symbols. When you get 2 symbols in a row of the same kind, any direction, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, you get 1 point. When you get 3 symbols in any row or direction, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, you get 2 points. Now you have 60 seconds to go ahead and get points and to win. And that's all I say. And so inevitably, people have a certain idea around this that they think, oh, I know this game. This game is tic-tac-toe. And so they proceed to play tic-tac-toe, usually 1 game per page, with X's and O's, and then they count up their points, and they have their points. But then there's other people that approach it differently. And so this exercise kind of highlights in a very interesting way within a room how people approach this. And we use this to explain a model that is very prevalent in all of our work. In fact, we use this model in all 3 tracks of our accountability work. This model is actually central to our entire cultural transition process. It's called the results pyramid. So we say at the top of the pyramid, you are getting results. Every individual is getting results. Every team is getting results. Every organization is getting results. The results that you are getting today, good, bad, or indifferent, are your results. So those are the results on the top of the pyramid. The results that you are getting come from the actions that people have taken. So how they approach their work, how vigorously they approach their work, how smart they approach their work, how they approach challenges, how they do things, those are the actions that will determine the results that you're getting. But below the actions, we say, and this is really the key, is people have beliefs, and it's people's beliefs that are really the key part of determining what their actions are. So going back to the prior example in game, if you believe that this was tic-tac-toe, then part of that belief says that there are rules. You can only put 1 symbol in 1 square, and that's the way the game is played. That belief limits your actions of how you would approach this game. But if you believe that, okay, I gave instructions, but I didn't articulate any parameters or boundaries, and so you didn't assume any boundaries where none were given, and you started to write symbols all around the edge of the page, and you didn't limit yourself to the checkerboard. In fact, you considered that to almost be a distraction. You might have gotten many hundreds or thousands of points in 60 seconds just by writing symbols all around the edge of the page. And that's a very different belief. But we have beliefs within our organizations that certain things can only be done a certain way. So, for example, you're given a task and you have a question. You have a belief as to who you can approach to get help with your question, as to who you can ask, and whether it's acceptable to ask, or whether you might be seen as dumb if you ask this question. So those beliefs will drive your actions, which will determine your results. And those beliefs are formed by the experiences that you have. So you have experiences within your organization, maybe where Jane asked a particular question, Jane got laughed out, called out, and guess what? Jane missed, the last 3 opportunities at a promotion, and she's no longer with the organization. So you see things happen that are experiences that form your beliefs around how things are done around here and how things really work around here. So you've seen somebody maybe try to go the extra mile and not get rewarded for it. So maybe that experience leads you to believe that going the extra mile isn't appreciated around here. You've maybe had an experience where you saw somebody put forward an idea, but they got dismissed and maybe even embarrassed by their idea. So that created a belief in you that you should keep your mouth shut when somebody asks for ideas or for input or for suggestions. Or you maybe have a belief that limits how you're able to do things in the organization because the belief is it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's prevalent in many organizations. So all of these beliefs that we have, they just form. Nobody dictates them. Nobody disseminates them. In fact, sometimes a leader maybe tries to tell us what they want us to believe, but we still don't believe it. Here's a little example I could do in a room and say, imagine I'm your new CEO. We're having this first meeting, and you're this hand-picked team of people, and I say, I really want to hear everybody's ideas. There's no such thing as a dumb idea. I'm sure you've heard that cliche before. So I tell you what I want you to believe, that you should give me all of your ideas and your input. But you have experiences that maybe tell you, I'm not so sure I buy that. Now, some people will believe it. There might be some naive people in the room that say, well, you know what? I'll believe anything anybody says until they prove me different. So that's one belief set. There's other people that say, I'm not going to believe it until you give me evidence that you really mean it. So that's a different belief set. And then there's other people that just say, I've had some experience where I'm not sure. And until I know you better, and so then if somebody does present an idea, and I've asked you to present your ideas, and now let's say I just say, well, that's a really dumb idea. That'll never work. I've now just given you a massive experience that ingrains this belief that no matter what I say or do after that, it's not going to change your belief. Your belief is that I don't really want to hear your ideas. And you might even counsel somebody who's about to come into a meeting with me to keep their mouth shut and to not present an idea. So that's how this pyramid works. And in order to really drive the actions and the behaviors, we really need to focus and work on what are people's beliefs and what are the experiences that we give, because every time we show up, every time we do things, every time we engage, every time we accept an excuse or accept this or accept that or whatever else, we're giving people experiences. And so we're constantly trying to teach people, what is the belief you want them to have? And is that a belief that drives the action, the behavior that are going to get you the results you really want to get? Fundamentally, if there are key results, things that are most important, we absolutely want to make sure we're driving the right behaviors and actions that are going to get us those results, which means we need to really manage and think about the beliefs that people have that are either serving or limiting that, and then provide the experiences that foster the right beliefs that drive the right actions and behaviors. It becomes ridiculously important. We call this the results pyramid. We put a little circle around the bottom 3 layers of it to say that this is really where culture ultimately resides within your organization. And to create a culture of accountability, we use this model most effectively to recognize what are the experiences we're giving people, what are the beliefs they're going to generate from that, and how do we then own and become more intentional in creating the right experiences that create the right beliefs. So ultimately, we want to create alignment where otherwise people are kind of in their own zone, working in their silos and not, in cross-functional conflict, where we get people instead aligned, all working towards the same results. And then, we go into our steps to accountability model. And in this model, we show that there's a line. And we say that below the line is where you're playing the blame game, and above the line is when you're in the steps to accountability. See it, own it, solve it, do it. So below the line, we say the results you're getting are the results that the environment, the circumstances, other people's contribution, lack of contribution, whatever other variables are getting will determine your results. Whereas above the line, we are controlling our environment or taking charge or manipulating or exerting influence upon our environment in order to drive the results we're trying to get. Below the line, we're feeling like we're not in control. Other environmental circumstances, other people, other people's contributions, they are in control of us, and we're only able to deliver based on those inputs. Whereas above the line, we're kind of operating in a mode where we are controlling our environment, our influences, and influencing what other things are happening in order to ensure we're driving towards the result. Below the line, we feel that we are being acted upon. Above the line, we are acting out upon our environment. Below the line, we're feeling more like a victim, like this is just what's happening to me, and whereas above the line, we're feeling more empowered and in control. We're driving the kind of activity and results. So below the line, just to highlight this in a little more detail, we show these are some items that we identify in the blame game. And I've actually put out a challenge to say I would encourage any organization that thinks they're already quite effective to take me up on this challenge. Let's come in and play this little blame game. And this is really to sort of surface and find out just truly how effective you are versus how much time is actually spent below the line playing the blame game, and excusing and or explaining away, why things are happening the way they're happening. So one of them is cover your tail. That's basically where you're kind of setting yourself up to make sure that you're not on the hot seat and not responsible later on down the road, making sure that basically it's not you who's in trouble, it's somebody else. Wait and see is kind of, I've sent this up for approval and I'm waiting for a response, and I've submitted or suggested this and nobody's done anything about it, or I've sent this off to so-and-so and I sent an email or I left a voicemail and I'm waiting for an answer back, and so we're just feeling kind of helpless and out of control until something else that somebody else does happens. Confusion, tell me what to do, is where, I don't know what to do about this. We didn't anticipate this. I didn't think this through. You didn't tell me what to do if this arised. So I need you to tell me what to do. I'm confused. You wanted it done this way versus that way. Finger pointing is where we're kind of pointing the blame to somebody else, where it's somebody else's fault for not having completed, let's say, something that we have a dependency upon in order for us to complete our function, or we're blaming, finance for some info we didn't get, or IT that something didn't happen or work correctly, or we can have a month to do something, our computer crashes the night before something, and all of a sudden IT is to blame. Ignore, deny is basically where, we kind of pretend that, I didn't get that memo, I didn't understand, you didn't tell it to me clearly, I missed that meeting, I wasn't in the loop, I was not in my pay grade. I've heard a lot of great explanations there, and it's not my job, is basically, it's that wasn't really for me to do, that's for somebody else to do, that's somebody else's responsibility. So we get into this game called blame storming. And so as I did this in the session, I asked a poll question. I asked, with projects and deadlines, people often have reasons, explanations, or excuses why they were unable to meet their commitments. So you can see the poll results there, that all the time, 28% said all the time. That's the case all the time. And then another 73, 74% said that it's often. So think about the performance drag that there is on getting projects and deadlines and key results where we permit and have an environment where people can have reasons, explanations, or excuses why they were unable to meet their commitments. That's a huge drag, and it ties to our premise that accountability is the fundamental underlying reason and drive for how we actually show up and execute and get stuff done. It permeates absolutely everything. So then we explain the steps to accountability, which is really, if you've ever watched the movie The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy and the other characters are going down the yellow brick road to find the wizard. And the wizard is going to solve all their problems, give them all what they need, and everything's going to be great, everything's going to fall into place, and it's all going to be beautiful. And then the wizard turns out to be a fraud. And so the Oz principle in its shortest form is, there is no wizard. So we use this story as a metaphor, and then we use the characters also as part of this metaphor to say that you have to have the courage of the lion to really see it, to really see and recognize really what's going on and what's my role in this and how am I contributing and what else. Own it is having the heart to really show the ownership of am I engaged and am I committed, and is everybody engaged and committed? Are we really operating at this with heart, or are we just kind of going through the motions? Solve it is having the brains of the straw man to to really solve it, to say, what else can I do? And how else do we get around this? And how else can we find a solution to this? And then do it represents Dorothy, who ultimately had to click her heels and finally go through and do what she could have done all along. But once she does it, then she finds that's what it takes to get her back to Kansas. So we list out some best practices around see it, own it, solve it, do it. Best practices around see it are obtaining the perspective of others, being open and candid in your communications, that you're not sugarcoating and beating around the bush and being indirect and hoping people get the message when we really weren't, in fact, clear on the message. Asking for and offering feedback, that's huge. Hearing the hard things so that I openly see the reality of the situation, that's incredibly important too. Owning it, being personally invested is a best practice. Learning from successes and failures is another one. Ensuring that your work is aligned with key results, that you're not just there to do some activity, but you're actually contributing to and aligning towards the key result. Acting on feedback that you receive becomes, takes some heart to do that. Solve it. This is where the brains come in, constantly asking, what else can I do? I tell people everywhere I go, that in itself is $1 million question. If you can go into most organizations of some substantial size, and if you can get them to consistently, habitually, regularly, frequently ask themselves and indoctrinate it in their culture to constantly ask, what else can I do? The short answer is there's always something, and the more we take that initiative, obviously it's going to be a huge performance driver. Collaborating across cross-functional boundaries instead of working in silos is another best practice. Creatively dealing with obstacles and taking the necessary risks, and also then creating, obviously, the environment that lets people creatively deal with obstacles and also take the necessary risks. Do it. Doing the things I say I'll do. Many people assume that in itself is accountability, but it's only one of the best practices of accountability. But it obviously is an important one. Staying above the line by not blaming others, because if we're blaming others, we are clearly not taking accountability. Tracking progress with proactive and transparent reporting. So this is recognizing that people need to see and we need to demonstrate that we're making progress as we committed and that people can see it and that we can check in on that on a regular basis. Transparency is often used in conjunction with accountability, particularly in government and political references, but transparency in and of itself is not accountability. I had a tremendous laugh. The CEO of the TransLink, I think it is, the transit system for Greater Vancouver, they created with much fanfare this accountability center, which is a whole bunch of metrics and data. And then if you read the article, what the CEO said, well, I think we're doing pretty okay, and if we can, move it a little bit or whatever, that'd be great. So, and I'm surprised that nobody called him on the carpet for that, because all you're doing is presenting data. You're not actually being accountable to say, this is what we're going to deliver. This is a number we're going to hit. This is what we're going to be able to achieve. And then lastly, building an environment of trust becomes incredibly important. So we talk about two different views of accountability. We need to do some mindset shift. The typical accountability question is, who is accountable for failing to achieve the result? So when something goes wrong and something has not hit the mark and the proverbial stuff has hit the fan, and somebody asks, who is accountable for failing to achieve the result? What is it we're looking for? We're looking for someone to blame, correct? This is the person we're going to throw under the, complete the sentence with me now. Everybody knows the next word is bus. It's funny how we have that in our vocabulary, isn't it? And then the Oz principle accountability question that we really want to get people to is, who is accountable for achieving the result? This is a much more impactful, powerful, empowering question. So let me give you an example. There's been some stories in the press recently about somebody who died in the care of the provincial government of Child and Family Services. It's quite the tragedy. And then, the media, everybody comes out and asks, the typical accountability kind of question. Who is accountable for failing to achieve the results? Who is accountable? Who's to blame? And try as you might to go through the circumstances. You can't find somebody who's going to raise their hand and say, you know what, it's my fault, I screwed up. The kid died because of what I did. Nobody's going to do that. It just doesn't happen. And so the more we try to enforce this negative accountability, pardon me, the more clever people get at going below the line, pointing fingers, covering their tail, and being able to blame somebody else. Whereas if we create a different question, we say, who is accountable for achieving the results that we want, that every single child in the care of the government is going to be well looked after? And voila, absolutely everyone will raise their hand, and now you can create this positive accountability, which is really what we're trying to get to. So the typical dictionary definition of accountability is subject to, having to report, explain or justify, responsible or answerable, which is what we're most accustomed to, right? We have a boss or a leader who holds us accountable, and if we have direct reports, it's our job to hold them accountable. But it's something that is imposed upon us, and that only has so much power. I like to say, actually, to this, that you can't effectively hold somebody accountable for something that they haven't agreed to do. I teach that in our others track. It's a very powerful message. But we have this accountability paradox, that the more you try to hold people accountable the wrong way, the less accountable they become. So the more we create a culture and environment where being held accountable is a negative and a punitive and a career limiting or challenging thing, the more clever people get with how to operate below the line, and the less accountable they actually become. So I'll give you an example of this. Some time ago, Premier Prentice came in to power as the Premier. There were a whole lot of things that had happened beforehand, and he introduced this Accountability Act. And then in a press conference, he said he's going to enforce the rules with vigor, which sounds good. You know, you want somebody there, strong hand, somebody who's going to be the watchman, who's going to make sure everybody's being accountable. But the challenge with that is, I happen to know that the province of Alberta was dealing with challenges with workplace bullies at the time. And so what you create is basically a word that I made up called accountability, where you've now just armed the bullies with more authority to hold people accountable the wrong way and to effectively bully people. The Oz principle definition of accountability is a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving key results, to see it, to own it, to solve it, and to do it. And so when I ask people, especially who work on projects, when you make a plan, how often do things go perfectly according to plan? And almost everybody will inevitably say that never happens. There's always something that comes up. Circumstances are inevitable. And so thinking that and applying that to this definition, personal choice to rise above one's, and I would say, inevitable circumstances, and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving key results, to see it, to own it, to solve it, to do it. In the absence of a positive definition of accountability, circumstances becomes one of those environmental factors that push us down below the line to say, well, I didn't get the result because this happened, because that happened, because the other happened. We didn't anticipate, we didn't plan for it, you didn't tell me what to do when it arose. And so we permit a whole bunch of below-the-line activity to impact negatively our results. So we also create this mindset around identifying things as accountability gaps. This is a very powerful lens and filter to look at what's happening within the organization. We say accountability gap is the difference between over here what is actually occurring, which is the reality, versus what we want or need to occur, which is jeopardizing our ability to achieve a key result. So there's a lot of things that maybe happen in the company kitchen as far as people washing their coffee cups and loading the dishwasher that we want things to happen a certain way and they're not, and they frustrate us. But there are key results that are really important to the organization, that there are things that are happening here, but what we want to have happen in order to achieve the result we're trying to set out is this. And we see that as a gap. That is a gap that is smacking you in the face, that is totally obvious, that is saying this is something that's going to hinder us from getting to our results. So who's accountable to close that? And the short answer is everybody. So if the accountability we were looking to create, for example, was the safety and the well-being of care of children in the care of the government, or for that matter, because many of you work in industrial organizations where there's lots of safety issues, where what you want to occur is that everybody goes home safe, that nobody misses a day, nobody goes home as an invalid or as a whatever in some kind of hindered way back to their families. So what we want to occur is this, that everybody operates in a safe way. There's clearly some gaps. Who's accountable to close those gaps? Well, short answer again is everybody. Safety is everybody's job. The key result is everybody's job. So we have these gaps that show up on individual level, on a team level, and also on an organizational level. And what we really want to get to is to a scenario where we are continually closing these gaps. Now, when I ran this webinar earlier, we did a poll and we asked we would benefit to learn by learning to hold each other accountable in a positive way. I know that this is something a lot of people, a lot of organizations have difficulty, have challenge with. So it would make a significant difference in our performance. You'll see that was something like 75%. And then 25% said it would improve our performance somewhat. So pretty well everybody agrees that, hey, if we could get better at holding each other accountable in a positive way, it'll make either a significant difference or at least it'll make an improvement, right? And so again, our view is that performance is impacted dramatically. How we do things and the results we get is dramatically impacted by our underlying level of accountability. Accountability permeates absolutely everything. So if we get that right, we're going to get a whole lot of other things right. Now, the reason why I'm redoing this is because I had left that poll up, and so people didn't get to see some of these other slides, and so that's why I redid it. So when we asked people how well people in the organization see it, this is the first step to accountability, 20% said people constantly seek and offer feedback, which is where ideally we would like to have everybody. 64% say feedback usually only happens when things really go wrong, and 16% said feedback rarely happens. I said this in the webinar, I can go anywhere and say this, that if you give me 1,000 people and I ask 1,000 people, when do you get feedback? I can plus or minus 5 or 10%, I can bet dollars to donuts, 950 out of 1,000 people are going to say either A, when I've screwed up, when something's gone wrong, or B, at the annual performance review when it is prescribed. And so that becomes, that's huge. Like when you really think about that, and I use the example of Andre DeGrasse, who went to the Olympics, and behind Usain Bolt, he's now the next fastest man on the planet. He won a silver medal. He didn't show up there just because he was that great, but part of the way was he had to get feedback every single time his feet hit the track, whether it was for practice or an actual competition. So even though there's hardly anybody in the world faster than him, he had to get feedback from somebody in order to get there. And so feedback, constantly seeking and offering feedback, I cannot understate this enough. There is no single thing I can think of that has a more direct correlation on performance improvement than feedback. I'll stop. So feedback is incredibly important. If we can get people to constantly seek and offer feedback, put that into our culture, get that as part of everybody's regular daily practice, we will get so much better, so much quicker. It'll make your head shake. And that becomes a key part of what we try to do here, that instead of only getting feedback when things have gone wrong and at the prescribed time, we get feedback on a very regular basis. Pretty well every time we make a contribution, we're getting feedback. Every time we show up, we're getting feedback. And that just makes us better. So that's such an accelerant. It's unbelievable. And when you really think about it, baby boomers have maybe been accustomed to only getting feedback for years or decades when they screwed up or at their annual performance review, but millennials nowadays are snapping pictures of their dinner, and they're giving reviews on Yelp, and they're posting things to Instagram and to Facebook, and they're getting feedbacks and likes and comments on things all throughout the day, and they're even rating their Uber driver and learning that the Uber driver is even rating them. So they're in a feedback-intensive world. And so to put them then into an organization to say, well, we're only going to give you feedback when you screw up or at the prescribed annual time, you're not engaging very well your millennials. I had just got to say that. I think there's a lot of thought leaders that are really impressing that point and suggesting that's an area we really need to improve. So we say that often seeing it has more to do with your ears than it does with your eyes. It's being able to hear, the real truth. And so the feedback cycle is that accountable people seek feedback, which then creates more accountable people. So I want to get better. I want to know how I can get better. I want to know, what I've done well and where I can improve. So the see it question is, what's the reality I most need to acknowledge? This is really, what is the perspective of others that I really need to see and hear as to how I'm showing up, how I'm doing, what I'm doing well, what I need to improve upon. That's really important information. I ask, often the question, have you ever known somebody who's really kind of clueless? And then when I do that in a room, then people often chuckle, right? But you can all think of somebody who thinks they understand a topic well, but they don't, right? So they talk about economics, but they don't really understand economics. So they talk about politics and they don't really know what's really going on, right? And so we see people like that who don't know what they don't know. And how do you get to know what you don't know? Because what you think you know that you don't is really dramatically holding you back. It's really impacting you. And so to get to know what you don't know is to seek feedback and to get the feedback. And that really becomes having the courage of the lion to really see what's the reality I need to acknowledge. What's really happening? Own it. So 30% say we've got, our level of engagement and ownership is high enough that we're going to execute well and hit our key results. But 62% say that, getting our key organizational results is in jeopardy because our engagement and ownership is somewhat lacking. And then, pardon me, the other number, 9% say, yeah, we're kind of hopeless. So if you look at yourself and in your own organization, is everybody showing up with the level of ownership engagement that you really need to have, especially to make sure that the stuff that's really important, the stuff that really matters, the key results, that they are in fact getting done and being achieved? And, there's a lot of surveys that Gallup and others put out about engagement surveys and scores, and they all kind of point to that we have a great challenge when it comes to people's level of engagement that we really need to improve. So we need to increase people's level of ownership. And there are ways to do that we just haven't really been doing yet. So one of the ways that we kind of teach is we provide this kind of scale and we say, look, there's levels of ownership. And there's two sides. So one is we can just tell people what to do. We can tell them, we can bribe them, and we can force them, in which case then we've got prisoners and we own their hands and their feet. We've got hands and their feet, what we would call compliance. But getting complete alignment is getting people to be logically in agreement. So they agree that, yes, what we are doing is right. We're doing it the right way. This is the right key results. I understand why this is. This makes sense to me. I get it, right? So that's the agreement part. And then the other part is the heart, which is to say, I agree it to the point and I'm bought in to the level that I'm totally involved, right? I'm bought in, I'm involved. And so what we want to create is hearts and minds, high level of ownership and engagement where people agree and are involved. That's total high level of ownership. And tying this back to the key results. If this is what we're really trying to achieve, if this is what's key to us, if somebody's not fully bought in on something that is really dramatically important, it's part of our purpose of existence, of what we're trying to achieve, I need to really look at that. You can have people, if you do a United Way campaign, I might be less excited and enthusiastic and engaged with the United Way campaign because, you know what, I'm a huge fan of the Children's Hospital and I'd rather send all my money to the Children's Hospital. But when it comes to a key result as to why the organization, the team exists, we need everybody to be fully bought in and invested. And so that becomes a model we really kind of walk people through to ensure we get to that point. So the own it question is, how am I contributing to the problem or solution? Am I an owner or am I a renter? Am I somebody that's fully taking ownership of this or not? Solving it. So this is where we ask, how creative and fully engaged are people in solving problems they face at work? So these are, remember, the inevitable obstacles that arise. So 27% say, yeah, we're pretty creative and fully engaged in solving these things as they arise. But 45% say that when these inevitable obstacles arise, they quickly get stuck on these problems, which means they maybe go below the line. They say, oh, I didn't understand what to do in that situation, and you didn't teach me for that inevitability, or you didn't tell me what to do in that situation, or you didn't provide, some guidance on that, or whatever the case might be. There's a lot of pressure to go below the line and to just say, whoops, this happened. We didn't anticipate it. I don't know what to do with it. So whatever. And then yet another 27% say, not only do they just get kind of stuck, they stop. They come to a dead stop and they say, I can't go any further until you solve it for me. That's not my job, is to solve problems as they arise. This becomes really key. So we know that obstacles are inevitable. How well people will address them becomes ridiculously important. So the solve it question is the million-dollar question that I pointed out. What else can I do? And then when it comes to do it, this is really about execution. So 28% in our survey said despite challenges that arise, people will stay focused, they'll follow through, and they'll execute on the organization's priorities. So that's a good number. That's ideally where we want 100%. But 61% say execution is an issue we need to improve upon in order to succeed. So that means, yeah, we agree on things, we come up with plans, but then we have a follow-up meeting and a number of people, well, they didn't get their stuff done and they didn't bring their deliverables to the next meeting, to the next stage where the next part of the decision is being made. And so our execution leaves somewhat to be desired. And then 11%, again, they assume they're doomed because they say, we're having great trouble with our execution. So the do it question is, what am I accountable to do by when? So that's really about making a plan. When we do this training actually in an organization, we go through the See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It, and we actually create a plan. So I'll kind of point that out on the next page. We use what we call the SOSD, which is See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It Accountability Tool. And we take a look at gaps that we've identified. So here are gaps. Remember, this is something that the reality, this is what's happening, but over here is a different thing of what we really need to have happen to make sure we achieve what we're setting out to achieve. And there's a gap. So who's accountable to close the gap? Ideally everybody. And then we ask them, what's the reality I need to acknowledge? What perspectives do we need to gather? Where do we need to get feedback from somebody? Who do we need to engage and ask and inquire about this to get them involved, to help us sort of appreciate what's really happening and why things are happening the way they are? And then how are we contributing to the problem or solution? Where's the level of ownership along the way? Do we have the right level of engagement by all the right stakeholders in order to make sure we move the needle on this and change it and fix it or improve it or do it differently or whatever the case is? And are we showing the level of ownership we need to, or are we just kind of looking at this as renters and as stewards as opposed to people who really own it? Then the solve it question, what else can I or we do? So what other solutions and ideas can we engage and find? And, I point this out all the time that in this highly connected world that we live in today with LinkedIn and everything else, every single one of you in your organization can reach out to somebody who's in a similar role in some other organization that's not necessarily a competitor, just different geography, where you could probably find a solution to something that you are struggling with. There's this whole body of work on the internet called Wikipedia, where every single thing that's been contributed to it has been contributed free of charge by people just willing to share their insight and their knowledge. So there's a lot of resources we can tap into to help people solve problems, to innovate. In fact, with this internet and capability, we can drive a level of innovation that's been absolutely unprecedented in human history. And so there are digital tools that we actually provide as part of this to help you do this. I've seen people pose problems and throw it out literally around the world and get insights from people around the world and ideas from people who have different roles and things of how to solve things. And just being able to gather all of that to look at new and innovative ways to solve problems, that's phenomenal. And then ultimately, those steps result in kind of a plan as to how we're going to tackle this. Who's accountable to do what by when? So these are the steps we're going to do. How do we then reconvene? How do we get this towards ultimately a solution that we can implement that's going to close this gap, period, and be done with it? So that becomes dramatically powerful tool to take these accountability gaps, to close them with obviously the highest leverage gaps first, but systematically close every other gap that we see. So inevitably, the things that are holding us back from achieving the results we've determined are key and most important, we now have a methodology and a process to consistently close those kind of gaps. And so this then becomes our tool and our methodology, as opposed to sometimes you hear about a problem, and I'll give you an example that came up politically, and I don't want to say anything to claim any political side one way or another, but there was an article that came out some time ago that said, our education system is failing our First Nations people. And so they presented data, which obviously there's plenty of data to support this, to show that the high school graduation rate of First Nations people within cities is lower than it is for the rest of the population. And then when you go into the rural areas, the delta between First Nations people that graduate versus those that don't is even higher. And so somebody said the summary of this was that our education system is failing First Nations people. And then somebody, a leader of our country, came out and said, that's horrible. Here's $3.5 billion. We need to fix this. So that becomes more of a situation of fire, aim, ready, as opposed to ready, aim, fire, in my view, because until you go through this step, what really is the gap, right? So there's realities of what's really happening, of, insights we can get from people on the ground as to why this and why that. And the solution is not easy. It's complex. And so we have to go through this methodology. Just throwing money at something, getting people to spend money is activity that ultimately is going to lead us right back to the same thing, just $3.5 billion poorer, right? So if we do this, then we go through a robust methodology to really acknowledge the reality of the situation, to get the right insights and inputs, look at, what's currently happening, where's the level of ownership and engagement of the parents and of the children, of the community and of the leaders and of the educators and of the provincial people and the federal people and the whatever else. How are they all impacting it, and how are they, engaged in order to do this? And what else can we do? Like, there's what other innovative ways can we do this? How can we look at education differently? How can we deliver differently? How can we tackle some of these things in ways that we hadn't thought of before, and then ultimately come up with a plan? So it's a very robust way to close these accountability gaps. Then we had another poll question where I asked everybody on the line, if we could stay above the line most or all of the time, we would be more effective. So absolutely much more effective, you can see, was close to 60% said absolutely we would be more effective if we could stay above the line most or all of the time. Another, 7% said we would definitely be more effective. So if we could stay above the line most or all of the time, we would definitely be more effective. And then there's, we might be a little more effective. That's, I don't know what percentage that is. It's a smaller number, but I would suggest that that's probably somebody, rather than being somebody who I think is already above the line most or all of the time, I'm suggesting that that's probably somebody who maybe doesn't have so much confidence that they can get their team or organization to spend most or all of their time above the line. So that kind of was the poll results. And then for a culture of accountability, I said, for us, a culture of accountability is ultimately what we're hoping to create, is not just, a bit of language and a bit of content around accountability, but really to drive a workplace culture. So we have our training, then we have digital tools that help not only go beyond the training, but to retain and to sustain, these actions, these behaviors, this language, these models, to create a workplace culture where people take accountability to think and act in the manner necessary to achieve results. That really becomes key. And that culture of accountability will be an absolute game changer. So in the OSC principle, we kind of close with this phrase to say, only when you assume full accountability for your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and results can you direct your own destiny. Otherwise, someone or something else will. And that really is true. Again, as I used in the steps to accountability model, when you're below the line, you're feeling a victim. People are acting upon you. You're helpless. You're kind of not in control. Other things are guiding and directing your own destiny. It's only when you assume full accountability, when you go above the line, and for your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and results, can you direct your own destiny. Otherwise, guaranteed, someone or something else will. So you can either choose to get the results that the world is going to give you, or you can choose to get the results that you want to create accountability for and that you're going to deliver. And I would hazard to say that if you can choose the latter and make the latter happen, you're going to be much more highly valued in the marketplace. You're going to be much more highly respected. You're going to be seen as much more of a leader. And you're going to be seen as the kind of person who people want to lead teams and to be a role model for others. So thank you very much for your time. Again, apologize for the people who participated in this webinar live, missed some slides because I left the poll up. I'm so sorry for that. I'll make sure I learn from that to not do that again. I have to take accountability myself, which I'm also doing so by fully re-recording this webinar for your benefit. So I hope that it is of good use and good value to you. Thank you again very much. And there was a survey afterwards. I look forward to getting people's responses on that. And also I will follow up with each of you to see how I can provide additional value. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.